The most feared man in Seoul was attending his wife's funeral when 3 children with his face stepped out of the white flowers and called him Uncle. For one violent second, Kang Tae-jin forgot how to breathe. This was a man who had stared down prosecutors, rival syndicates, hostile shareholders, and grieving families without blinking. Men twice his age lowered their voices when he entered a room. Entire streets changed shape around his decisions. But in that funeral hall, beside a framed portrait of the woman he had already failed once in life, his hand trembled. Do the math. Yoon Seorin had disappeared 3 years ago. The children standing in front of her memorial could not have been older than 2.5. And the oldest boy had Tae-jin's exact eyes. That was the first bombshell. The second was worse. Because the dead woman whose funeral he was attending was not dead at all. She was standing near the back of the hall in a black coat, pale and still, watching him from beneath a veil of silence so complete it made every armed man in the room look small. Subscribe to Korean Mafia Boss for more stories like this, because when a funeral becomes proof of betrayal instead of grief, and 3 children arrive carrying the truth a man spent years burying, what exactly is left of power once the woman you erased returns alive enough to destroy it? No one moved. Not the lawyers, not the bodyguards, not the older women who lived for scandal but feared witnessing history too closely. White chrysanthemums lined the floor. Incense curled slowly into the air. The portrait of Seorin, chosen by people who believed she was gone, stood beneath a ribboned condolence banner from families who had never once treated her gently while she lived under their roof. The children stood in a neat line. Whoever raised them had taught them perfectly. Shoes polished, collars straight, hands folded in front. The little girl in the middle held a flower carefully, like she understood that even petals deserved respect. Mother said we must greet properly, she said. Mother, not mommy, not mama. Formal, clear, precise. A child's voice with Seorin's discipline inside it. Tae-jin stared at them, and something cold cracked open in his chest. One of the boys shifted slightly and glanced at the framed portrait. The other lifted his chin in the same quiet, defensive way Tae-jin did when he was angry and hiding it. The girl looked straight at him without fear. Then the oldest boy asked the question that split the room open. Are you really our uncle? Across the hall, Chairwoman Kwon Hye-jin recovered first. Of course she did. She had built half her adult life on speaking before the truth could gather enough strength to stand. Whose children are these? She asked, too quickly. No one answered her, because by then everyone with eyes had already begun doing the math. Tae-jin looked past the children, and there she was, Yoon Seorin, alive, thinner than before, sharper at the cheekbones, dressed without luxury but not without dignity. Her face had changed in the way faces change when a person survives alone for too long and discovers she can. But her eyes were exactly the same, calm enough to be mistaken for softness by fools, dangerous enough to punish arrogance without raising her voice. He said her name once. Seorin. It sounded ruined. She did not flinch. You shouldn't use my name like we still share a life, she said. No tears, no public collapse, no dramatic accusation. Somehow that hurt him more. Then she bent slightly toward the children. Bow to the portrait. We are leaving. They obeyed instantly. That was when Tae-jin understood the part that would haunt him most. Those children trusted her the way children trust the person who has never failed to return. Not him. Her. 3 years earlier, before the funeral flowers and the children and the punishment wrapped in tiny black shoes, Kang Taejin had everything men like him were told to worship. Power. Money, not Seorin. Current marriage, a disposable category. That night she waited for him in the dark. No dramatic setup. Just a lamp off, a silent room, and her sitting upright on the sofa in the clothes she had worn to the family dinner, where Hyejin treated Rina like a guest of honor. "You could have told me," Seorin said when he entered. Taejin stopped in the doorway. He could have lied better. He was good at lying strategically. But the problem with people who love you is that they hear the moral shape of a sentence before they hear the words. "Nothing has happened," he answered. She gave a short laugh with no warmth in it. "I didn't ask that." He stayed still. She looked at him, and disappointment settled over her features so gently it nearly undid him. "I asked why you didn't tell me." He had no answer worth saying, because the truth was ugly. He liked being admired in rooms where his conscience was not present. He liked postponing conflict. He liked believing he could manage competing loyalties without naming any of them. And above all, he liked control more than honesty. Seorin stood and smoothed invisible wrinkles from her skirt. "Do you know what humiliates a wife more than betrayal?" she asked quietly. "Being the last person in the house expected to understand it." That was the first night she slept in another room. The second night, Hyejin arranged tea with family elders. It was not a conversation. It was a trial disguised as etiquette. Porcelain cups, silk cushions, gentle voices, old men speaking in unfinished sentences so women could do the shame work for them. Hyejin discussed public image, lineage, pressure, the importance of timing for a house entering a higher level of legitimacy. Then, with soft poison and perfect manners, she said the sentence, "No woman forgets." A wife who cannot secure an heir should at least know how not to obstruct one. The room went still. Taejin was there. That mattered most, because he heard it, and he hesitated, only for a breath. But Seorin saw it. A husband who truly loved his wife should not need time to decide whether her dignity is worth defending. She rose before anyone dismissed her, bowed to the eldest, bowed to the portrait, bowed even to Hyejin with formal politeness so flawless it made older women uneasy. "I understand," she said. She walked upstairs. Taejin followed too late. By the time he entered their room, Seorin had already taken off her ring and placed it beside the lamp. Not thrown, placed. There was something devastating about that control. "Say it clearly," she told him, without looking up from the travel case she was packing. "Don't hide tonight. There are pressures you don't see." Wrong answer. Seorin closed the case. "I see all of them. I just learned where I rank among them." "You don't rank below anyone." "Then defend me." Silence. There it was again. Hesitation. Weakness wearing a strategic face. She lifted her eyes to him then, and for once she did not protect him from himself. "I stood beside you before any of these people found you useful," she said. "I learned their rules, so they would have fewer weapons to use against you. I tolerated contempt because I believed I was protecting our future. If I am now inconvenient, then say it properly and spare me the insult of ambiguity." He stepped forward. "You are not inconvenient." "Then why is another woman being prepared for my place?" No answer. None she would respect. By dawn, she was gone. Not with a scene, not with threats, just a note left where he would see it. I will not compete for dignity in my own marriage. Do not look for me until you understand the difference between power and responsibility. At first he thought she would return in a week. Then he thought she would return in anger. Then he thought he would find her quickly, because there was nowhere in Seoul he could not reach if he truly wanted something. That was his arrogance speaking. By the time he realized Sioran had vanished with purpose, not impulse, she had already learned the truth that changed everything. She was pregnant. Not with one child, 3. The clinic room was small, private, anonymous. A doctor with tired eyes turned the monitor slightly and said, surprised, "Triplets." Sioran stared at the screen. 3 heartbeats, 3 lives, 3 heirs if she returned, 3 bargaining chips if she trusted the wrong person. 3 reasons never to let herself be dragged back into a system that would call motherhood sacred while using children as leverage. She sat there alone except for her friend Dr. Bae Yunju, who arrived late and breathless and immediately understood enough to become dangerous to anyone who underestimated loyalty. "What are you going to do?" Yunju asked softly. Sioran kept looking at the flickering screen. "The only thing I can do," she said, "protect them from the people who think blood gives them rights." And yes, that included Taejin. That was the hard part of this story. He loved her once. Maybe he still did. But love without responsibility is just another appetite. Sioran knew that better than anyone. So she disappeared properly. New records under a different name. A quieter city. No digital trace easy to follow. No emotional late-night message sent in weakness. When Taejin's men searched, they found nothing meaningful. He searched longer than most people knew, but not long enough. Because while he was still ordering teams and checking ports and hospital records, Hyejin was already working the larger board. A missing wife threatened stability. An unresolved disappearance threatened mergers. A respected family required closure, and once the machinery started, it moved with polished speed. Legal suggestions, administrative shortcuts, quiet influence applied to incomplete evidence. Taejin knew it was wrong. He also knew signing would simplify everything. He signed. That was the unforgivable choice. Not rumor, not temptation, not delay. The signature. Ink on paper declaring order more valuable than truth. Years later, he would understand exactly what kind of man he had been in that moment. The kind who confused administrative clarity with moral courage. Far from Seoul, Sioran gave birth in a small private clinic outside Jeonju during the first hard rain of autumn. Labor came long and difficult. She bit back cries because fear had taught her economy. Yunju held one hand. A midwife she barely knew kept saying, "Breathe, breathe. You're doing well." The first boy arrived quiet, alert, furious in his own dignified way. The girl came second, crying sharply until Sioran touched her cheek. The last boy arrived louder than the others combined, as if announcing that silence would not be his gift to the world. Sioran looked at all 3 and cried from a place too deep for panic to reach. She gave them her surname, Yoon Hajun, Yoon Hain, Yoon Minseo. Not to punish their father, to anchor them to the one parent who had chosen them before they had names. The next 3 years would have broken a lesser woman. Triplets are chaos, even in love. In fear, they are warfare conducted without sleep. Fevers, bills, rotating schedules, One child waking another, strange towns asking quiet questions, landlords watching too closely, work taken under false modesty and real skill. Sioran did remote accounting and operational consulting for boutique businesses that never knew the woman fixing their books had once advised one of Seoul's most feared men. She made every one count. No self-pity, no chasing, no longing performed as nobility. She built routine like a fortress. The children learned how to bow before elders, how to put shoes in place, how to thank even tired workers with both hands on a cup if they were offering something. They learned calm voices, clear apologies, bedtime stories, strict kindness. She taught them not to sneer at people with less and not to fear people with more. Most importantly, she taught them not to inherit bitterness. And if that sounds like the work of a saint, it wasn't. It was the work of a mother who understood that pain passed through blood more easily than money did. Meanwhile, Taejin ruled like a man who had won too much to enjoy any of it. He cut Rena from his life within months. She accepted it with one final observation that stayed with him longer than he admitted. "You didn't choose me," she said. "You chose not to be honest with anyone." Then she left. Hyejin approved of the separation. The rumor quieted. The empire expanded. Taejin became more disciplined, more feared, less human. He cleaned internal operations, reduced reckless exposure, moved assets through cleaner channels, and demanded silence from everyone around him because silence was cheaper than guilt. At night, though, he sometimes stood outside Sioran's old room. He left it untouched. Books aligned, pen in tray, scarf on chair. A fossilized version of a life he had made administratively convenient to mourn. Then came the third anniversary of her disappearance. Hyejin suggested a formal memorial service, public enough to calm lingering rumors, private enough to retain dignity, strategic enough to clear succession ambiguity. Taejin agreed. Sometimes self-punishment wears a suit and signs invitations. And that is how the funeral happened. That is how Sioran returned. That is how three small voices shattered a man more thoroughly than any enemy ever had. Back in the funeral hall, after the first shock passed and everyone with rank had been ordered out, Sioran faced him properly for the first time in 3 years. Hyejin remained, of course. So did Taejin's aide, Nam Giseok, who had learned the value of silence from working near dangerous people. Taejin said the stupid thing first. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sioran looked at him as if he had asked why fire burned. "You signed documents declaring me gone." "I searched for you. For a while." That landed harder than a scream. Inside the folder were 4 pages. Clear, sharp, exact. Restricted access only. No public claim on the children without her consent. No unsupervised meetings. No removal from her custody. No using them in inheritance politics. No photographs. No tracing her residence through third parties. Any violation, and she would disappear again with evidence powerful enough to collapse whatever remained of the Kang family's reputation. Taejin read every line. Then he signed. No negotiation. That was phase 1. Restricted access. And it was humiliating in exactly the way he deserved. The first visit took place in a private pediatric therapy garden, run by a foundation Sioran trusted. Neutral ground. Staff vetted. Cameras controlled. No chance for one side to dominate by location alone. Taejin arrived early. Of course he did. The children arrived with Sioran and Yunju. He was introduced not as father, not even as family, but as someone important you are meeting carefully. That sentence cut him more cleanly than any insult. He sat on a small wooden chair while Minseo examined him like a suspicious sparrow. "Why do you have so many guards?" the boy asked. Before Taijin could answer, Sioran said, "Because some adults confuse power with safety." Minseo accepted that immediately. Hyen asked if he knew how to tie ribbon bows. He did not. She made him practice on a cloth doll for 10 full minutes. Hajun watched in silence, then asked, "Do you always wear a watch?" "Yes." "Why?" "So I don't make people wait." Hajun thought for a moment. "Mother says that too." Mini payoff, not affection, alignment. Taijin kept coming. No gifts Sioran had not approved. No personal questions about where they lived. No asking them to call him anything. No touching unless they initiated it. One afternoon, Minseo asked the worst question in the calmest voice. "If you're not uncle, then what are you?" The room went still. Taijin looked at Sioran. She gave him nothing. So he answered the child directly. "I'm someone who should have come sooner." No title, no excuse. Just truth shaped carefully enough for small ears. Even Sioran looked at him differently after that. Weeks passed. He missed nothing. He moved meetings, delegated negotiations, canceled dinners. Men who once believed Taijin answered only to ambition began noticing he now answered to visitation times and nap schedules. Then the first external threat arrived. Not violence, something smarter. A private preschool Sioran was considering suddenly received anonymous warnings that the children were linked to a dangerous family. A parenting forum lit up with vague speculation about illegitimate heirs and hidden assets. A tabloid editor quietly requested confirmation regarding 3 minors tied to a controversial businessman. Taijin traced the leak within hours to a public relations subcontractor once used by Hyejin's office. He could have crushed it brutally. Instead, he handled it responsibly. He called the school himself, guaranteed privacy protections, funded anti-harassment systems for all students rather than only his own, and privately advised them that if they felt nervous, Sioran should withdraw the application and never look back. When Sioran asked why he would surrender the school after solving the problem, his answer came without ego. "A place that breaks under pressure once will break again. They need peace, not prestige." That was phase 2, trial upgrade. He earned slightly more trust through protection that did not center his pride. Soon after, Sioran allowed him to take the children on a short, supervised outing in a secure van with discreet backup at distance, not beside them. A museum on a weekday morning. No cameras, no family staff, no branding. Hyen assigned snacks. Minseo asked why adults whispered in expensive places. Hajun stood beside Taijin in front of a model city and asked, "Did you build buildings?" "Some." "Do people live in them?" "Yes." "Then they should be safe first." Mini payoff again. The boy was testing values, not facts, and Taijin, who once built his life by staying emotionally unreadable, found himself answering carefully because 3 children were measuring him against standards far cleaner than the world's. Halfway through that season, here is the question that keeps stories like this alive. If you were Sioran, would you let the man who erased you earn his way back one action at a time? Or would you protect your children by leaving him forever outside the gate? Tell me what choice you would make, because this is where morality stops being simple. Pressure escalated. Hyejin stopped denying the children and started reframing them. At family dinners and donor teas, she spoke of instability, of the need to protect minors from emotional confusion, of how women under prolonged strain sometimes made unreasonable demands. She floated private concerns about registration, irregularities, inheritance exposure, and whether a household under so much scrutiny could be suitable for children at all. Translation: remove Seorin without appearing cruel. Taejin responded strategically. He shifted key votes in the family office away from Hyejin's loyalists, reopened old trust records, brought in external counsel, ordered a forensic review of every document tied to Seorin's presumed death process. What came back made him sick. Nothing overtly criminal, just influence placed exactly where his weakness had once been. Memos from Hyejin's circle about succession ambiguity. Recommendations to accelerate closure for reputational certainty. His own signature waiting at the bottom, like the final cowardice. That night, alone in his office with rain against glass, Taejin finally admitted the truth out loud. I wanted this resolved more than I wanted it right. No audience, no performance, just confession. The real vulnerability came later. Hyen had an allergic reaction after a private cultural center event, failed to disclose walnuts in a dessert glaze. She recovered quickly, but the terror of nearly losing a child strips people to their bones. Taejin reached the hospital before the center's director could invent a defense. He secured the floor, got the right specialist, contained the media risk, and said nothing dramatic while Seorin sat rigid with fear. After Hyen stabilized, Seorin stood in the corridor staring through the glass. Taejin approached slowly. I need to say something without asking you to make me feel better, he said. She didn't stop him. I didn't lose you because another woman mattered more, he said. I lost you because I was a coward in rooms where everything had a price. I thought I could control the damage and fix the truth later. I let paperwork stand where responsibility should have been. And every day since, I have known that if you had really died, the last thing I did as your husband was make your absence convenient. His voice roughened just slightly. I kept your room untouched, not because I deserved to mourn you, because I knew I had failed you in the ugliest administrative way possible. Seorin stayed silent long enough for the words to become heavy. Then she said the one thing he had not allowed himself to imagine. The hardest part wasn't raising them alone. It was making sure they didn't grow up bitter, because bitterness would have been easier. That cut straight through him, because while he had been becoming feared, she had been doing the holier work. Then she handed him car keys. Drive us home. That was phase 3, inner life access, not romance, permission. He drove to a quiet, renovated hanok outside the city. Warm light, stone courtyard, children's boots by the door, crayon marks hidden badly behind a low cabinet, a chore chart, tiny labeled cups, laundry drying neatly, budget sheets clipped near the kitchen desk. No luxury, just order built from exhaustion and intelligence. He removed his shoes and stepped inside like a trespasser in a sacred place. Minseo looked up from a floor cushion and announced, Mother says, sorry, adults must become useful. Hyen handed Taejin a dish towel. Dry these. So the most feared man in Seoul stood at a modest kitchen counter drying small cups while Seorin stirred porridge and Yunju watched with open satisfaction. He began learning routines. Hajun liked the same bedtime story read the same way. Hyen needed her blanket folded twice at the corner. Minseo asked impossible questions after lights out. "If you were absent before," he asked one night, "how do we know you won't be absent later?" Taejin answered from the doorway, quietly. "You won't know from what I say. You'll know from whether I keep returning." That answer reached Seorin more than flowers ever could have. Autumn passed into winter. At Chuseok, Seorin allowed Taejin to attend a memorial meal at her grandmother's home. This was not a sentimental invitation. It was a formal test inside an older system than his empire. The table was arranged with care, fruit stacked correctly, soup placed precisely, rice bowls aligned, the eldest seated first. Ancestral etiquette observed in the old way. Seorin's grandmother sat upright in muted hanbok, silver hair pinned cleanly, gaze sharp enough to peel varnish off a lyre. Taejin bowed deeply. "You are late by 3 years," she told him. "Yes, Halmione." During the meal, he waited before touching chopsticks, poured tea with both hands, accepted correction without pride. And when the grandmother asked, in front of everyone, what legal protections existed for the children, he answered clearly. Custody remains with Seorin. Their assets will be placed beyond internal family interference. Recognition will happen through external channels, not family discretion. My name will not be used against them. The old woman nodded once. A man who regrets properly does paperwork before poetry. Seorin lowered her eyes, but not fast enough to hide that the line landed. Then Phase 4 arrived, as all real tests do, not through emotion, but through pressure. Hyejin teamed quietly with Assemblyman Choi's network and seeded a two-front attack. Media columns hinted that Seorin had hidden the children to extort the Kang family. A family court petition appeared requesting emergency review of the children's welfare due to security instability and conflicting claims. At the same time, Seorin received a private settlement package offering wealth, foreign relocation, elite schooling, and silence. Paid exile. Remain outside the registry forever, and everyone would be comfortable. She read the offer once and placed it on the table. When Taejin arrived, rain still on his coat, she asked, "Do you know why I never contacted you when I was pregnant?" He said nothing. "Because I believed if I gave birth within your reach, they would become symbols before they became children." She slid the settlement papers toward him. "This proves I was right." He read them and looked up with something final in his face. "If you solve this the old way," she said, "we are finished." He nodded. "No shadows," she continued. "No private regret. If you claim them, you do it publicly, officially, in a way your family cannot reverse. If that costs you power, then that is the correct price." That was the full commitment test. And this time, Taejin did not hesitate. The next evening, he called a formal Kang family dinner at the Hill Mansion. Everyone attended. Elders, cousins, advisors, Hyejin in pearls and silk, already preparing to steer the mood. Taejin arrived last and remained standing. He placed 3 documents on the polished table. A paternity confirmation packet, a corrected family registry filing, a forensic review of the death status process. Then he spoke. 3 years ago, I failed my wife. I allowed her disappearance to be administratively closed when it should not have been. That failure is mine. Yoon Seorin is alive. The 3 children she raised alone are my children. They will be legally recognized and protected outside this family's manipulation. The table went rigid. One uncle muttered about reputation. Taijin turned to him. A reputation built on erasing a woman and her children deserves to collapse. Yejin tried the old weapon. You would humiliate this family over a woman who abandoned her place? And finally, after years of delay, he gave the answer Sioran should have heard long ago. No, he said. I am humiliating this family by revealing what it did to the woman who stood beside me before any of you found me useful. Hyejin changed tactics immediately. If you proceed, the Choi alliance dies. Board support fractures. Prosecutors reopen old files. You could lose chairmanship. Taejin held her gaze. Then let it cost me. Public choice. Undeniable. He then did what truly separated this moment from his former self. He refused illegal retaliation. When older lieutenants suggested rougher solutions to silence Hyejin's allies, Taejin shut them down. My children will not inherit safety built on dirtier sins. That line traveled through his organization faster than any threat. The next morning, he held a press conference at the family foundation. Cameras everywhere, analysts, reporters, rivals, donors, Hyejin in the front row. Sioran standing off to the side with counsel, not beside him, because this was not reconciliation. It was responsibility. Taejin spoke without notes. He corrected the narrative, named Sioran as his lawful wife unless she chose otherwise, acknowledged his children, announced independent trusts, legal recognition, external review, and his temporary step back from executive chair duties during the investigation. Then, before the entire country, he bowed deeply toward Sioran. A real bow. Not symbolic, not polished. Apology in public form. Seoul did what Seoul always does when elite shame becomes visible. It watched. The fallout was expensive. The Choi alliance collapsed. 2 board members resigned. Investigators reopened enough files to hurt. Investors panicked. Hyejin's communications were subpoenaed. Society pages turned vicious. Online gossip exploded. But the story did not land the way Hyejin expected, because people saw Sioran. Not as a scandal, as a woman who had been erased by power, raised triplets alone, returned with discipline instead of revenge, and still refused to hand her children over for status. The children cared about none of it. They cared that bedtime remained stable, that Hein's ribbon box was found after the press chaos, that Hajun's books stayed arranged by size, that Minseo got a proper answer to whether reporters were just adults who ask questions too late. Usually, Taijin admitted. Minseo nodded. Then Mother is still smarter. No one argued. Spring came slowly. Taijin no longer had the same kind of power he once worshipped. Good. He had something harder. Accountability. He now had a key to the outer gate of Sioran's home, not the front door. He used it carefully. Never arrived unannounced. Bought only what was on her grocery list. Sat in parent meetings. Signed school forms. Learned how to braid badly until Hein allowed him to stop trying. Repaired cabinet hinges with imperfect hands instead of summoning workers for every little thing. One night, after the children fell asleep in a pile of blankets and storybooks, Sioran found him fixing a drawer runner in the kitchen. You still repair things badly, she said. He glanced up. It opens now. That is not excellence. It's progress. A pause. Then she asked, why didn't you remarry? He could have answered sentimentally. Instead, he chose truth. Because there was no one else, he said. And because I didn't trust the version of me who once thought replacement was possible. She looked at him for a long moment. I don't know if I can ever give you back what we were. He nodded. You shouldn't. If you did, it would mean the years meant nothing. That was when something softened in her expression. Not surrender, not forgiveness, but recognition that the man in her kitchen was no longer asking to skip the cost. A week later came the smallest and most devastating payoff of all. Morning light, breakfast table, fruit slices, school bags, Hein adjusting her sock with solemn concentration, Ha-jun reading, Min-seo trying to put a mitten on the wrong hand because order bored him. Tae-jin stood by the table holding a permission slip for a museum trip. Hein looked up and asked naturally, Appa, did you sign it? Silence. Not sharp, tender, the kind that changes rooms instead of breaking them. Tae-jin froze. Min-seo immediately grinned because he loved emotional chaos. Ha-jun kept reading, too intently. Seorin met Tae-jin's eyes across the table, and for the first time, there was no accusation there. Only fragile possibility. Yes, Tae-jin said softly. I signed it. Hein nodded, satisfied, and reached for her fruit. Children do that. They move on after dropping the kind of grace adults spend years trying to deserve. Did that fix everything? No, it shouldn't. Hyejin was not magically gone. She remained diminished but dangerous, a woman who had built her life too carefully to collapse in one season. Legal reviews continued. Family loyalties shifted by inches, not miracles. Tae-jin did not recover his old throne exactly. Some doors stayed closed. Some allies never returned. Also good. Not every loss should be reversible. But in Seorin's house, a different order slowly formed. Tae-jin took the lower seat when elders visited. He let the children's routines outrank his schedule. He disclosed what needed disclosing. He chose patience over possession. Seorin did not melt. She watched, verified, adjusted boundaries only after repetition proved something speeches could not. That is the truth most stories skip. Redemption is boring in the middle. It looks like consistency, like arriving on time, like not reaching too quickly, like holding a child's backpack in one hand and your own pride in the other, and dropping the wrong one. One evening in late spring, after the children had fallen asleep early from a long day in the city, Seorin stepped outside to the courtyard and found Tae-jin waiting beyond the gate instead of letting himself in. "Why are you standing there?" she asked. "You didn't tell me I could come tonight." She looked at him for a long time. Then she opened the gate wider. Not a kiss, not a dramatic embrace, a gate. Sometimes that is more intimate than romance. They stood beneath the dim courtyard light while Seoul flickered far away beyond the quiet lane. "I still haven't decided what you are to me," she said. "That is fair. But I know what you must continue being to them." He nodded. "And if you fail again," she said softly, "there will be no second resurrection." A small, broken smile touched his mouth. "I know." Then she asked the question that mattered more than forgiveness. Was it worth it? He understood. The control, the secrecy, the convenience. The empire protected at the cost of the one person who loved him before power arrived. "No," he said, "not for 1 second." Inside the house, Min-seo shouted in his sleep. Hein murmured something soft. Ha-jun, always the quiet guardian, rose to check on his siblings before settling again. Their children, his punishment, her proof, the truth no empire could bury. And maybe that was the real ending. Not that love conquered power. It didn't. Power still existed. Law still mattered. Reputation still bit. Dangerous people remained dangerous. The ending was smaller and therefore more real. A woman kept her dignity. 3 children grew up watched, not traded. A man who once signed away truth learned to stand outside a gate and wait for permission. Some sins are never forgiven. Some are simply answered by the life built after them. And some funerals are not endings at all. They are where the dead stop cooperating with lies. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Korean Mafia Boss for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, if you were Seorin, would you have opened the gate for him again, or let